Everyone, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I have another great podcaster with a brand new podcast, and you need to go check it out. Joey's here with me. We're going to be talking about his podcast and his journey, and he's got a lot of great ideas, a lot of great questions. He's trying lots of new tools, and it's exciting to connect with him. Welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you here as our co-host.
I appreciate you having me on. I've been looking forward to this one for, it's been about a week and a half now.
There you go. Awesome. And I'm glad we had our little pre-chat. I'm glad we got to meet each other. Let's start off right at the beginning. Let's talk about your podcast. Tell us all about it, how long you've had it. What's it all about?
Well, it started on August 1st. I wanted to put it on a day where every year it would have an anniversary date that I would remember. Good. That way I have a target day of, I'm always looking for accomplishments, like just small wins. So for every month I hit the first of the month, there's a win for me.
Good.
And then I get to August 1st next year, there's a huge win for me. So that was one way that I wanted to start it out. And I did start out with 2 episodes. I uploaded 2 episodes to begin with. I had 3 done, and I thought about uploading all 3 of them, but I didn't know what I was going to do for episode 4, so I held one back.
Nice. So what's the name of your show?
It's called UnMuffled Banter. And I named it UnMuffled Banter mainly because I didn't know exactly what I wanted it to be about initially. I'm kind of one of those guys that I'm into a lot of different things. I like paranormal activity type of stuff. I like stuff like Bigfoot and aliens, but I'm also big into like helping people who are going through difficult situations. And that's more where my podcast has gone, the direction that it has gone, and the guests that I've had come on. And it's turned more into a podcast about resilience and overcoming difficult situations in life and turning those difficult situations into something positive.
Nice. So tell me a little bit about some of the guests you've had on your show.
Well, I just had, his name is Dr. Fred Moss. He's a retired psychiatrist, and it's called Beyond Diagnosis, Dr. Fred Moss's Unconventional Wisdom. And some of the things that he has talked about in there, some people might think it's kind of out there because we talked about global madness. And he has an article that is called Global Madness, which is encouraging listeners to explore the disenfranchised and the freedom of self-expression. And he has a lot of unique ways of looking at life, but also mental health, but also in bringing people together. And one of the things that he had talked about was bringing the world together as one. And one of the things that was mentioned was COVID-19. You know, that was what a lot of people called a global pandemic.
Yeah.
His thoughts were it wasn't a global pandemic because there's a lot of people that didn't consider it a pandemic at all. You know, and there's a lot of people that didn't take the vaccine. There's a lot of people that wouldn't even wear a mask. It didn't bring the world together. And his thoughts are maybe the only thing that could bring the world together is an alien invasion. And maybe that would cause, you know, everybody of different religions, different races, or, you know, different political stances to all come together to work as one for one common cause. And I thought that was a very unique way to look at things. And of course, you know, with the government coming out and talking about aliens recently, or having congressional meetings and talking about some of that stuff. Who knows? We never know. And so I thought that was a very unique episode for sure.
Amazing. I love that you get to meet great people having a podcast. And some of these people, if you didn't have a show and you reached out to the mayor of your city and said, I'd love for you to spend, I want to go take you out for lunch and talk to you for an hour. Your mayor would be like, who are you? Why are you calling me? But then you have a podcast and you invite the mayor to come on your podcast and they're like, sure, I'd love to come and talk to you. So having a podcast really opens the door to talk to some really amazing people. So I love that you're doing that.
It really does. Yeah. I had another guest. She's an EFT coach, which is emotional freedom techniques. And I deal with a lot of anxiety and depression. And I didn't know anything about EFT, but after having her on as a guest and learning more about it, I realized that this is something that could help anxiety and bring me back down to a calming point, to where I'm not freaking out or going into a panic mode. And that's something I never would have even considered. So there's a lot of different guests that I've had that either I've learned something from or had interesting conversations, and I'm loving the whole podcasting thing. It's gone a different direction than I expected, but it's gone better than I expected.
Nice. It's nice that you can get some help and support for your own journey just by having guests on. That's amazing. I love that. That's what your podcast is about. That's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So before we hit record, you mentioned you had been listening to some of the episodes of the How to Podcast series. Thank you for doing that. And you've kind of changed your plans a little bit on how you were podcasting based on some of the content of the episodes here on the show. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that something's resonating with you. From your perspective and your recollection, what kind of things are you seeing differently now that you've listened to the show and got a little bit some different information?
Well, I was one of those people that felt like, I had to have the best of everything to podcast.
Yeah.
And after doing it for 2 months, I've realized that I went overboard on stuff and I was spending money on stuff that I didn't need. And one of those is a website called Podcastle. Now, I am a huge advocate of the website. I love them. Yeah. It's a great website. They offer great services. And a lot of it is they level out your audio. They take out a lot of the noise in your episodes, but you can also get your transcriptions for your episodes. But from listening to your podcast, I've learned that I can get some of that stuff for free where I'm paying $15 a month. And I'm like, well, let's kind of test these things out and work with those. And so one of those was a program called Levelator, I believe is what it's called.
Yeah, that's right.
And I've used that on my last 2 episodes. And to me, it works just as good as Podcastle, if not maybe even better.
Good. It's pretty simple to use, right?
It is. You just drag and drop your episode into it. It does its thing, and then it outputs this episode into the same folder that your original was in. And I mean, you can play them one after the other and just tell the differences in the audio. And it's a very drastic change. It's amazing.
Yeah. I use Buzzsprout for 3 of my podcasts, 3 of my 7. And they have an add-on feature on top of your monthly fee where they do magic mastering, they call it.
Yeah.
And they basically do the exact same thing that I was using Levelator for. So I stopped using that add-on because, again, that's 3 podcasts, $6 each. I got to pay for that. So to find any little tools like that can save us some money, especially when we're not making money from our show. I have no income coming from my podcast. And for you, you're a new podcaster. It's going to take a while before money starts coming our way. We can always upgrade as money becomes available. And you love those tools. Podcastle sounds like an amazing place, a really great website. But maybe once down the line when money does start coming in, then upgrade and maybe go back. That's a great tool.
Yeah. I use Buzzsprout as well. I ended up buying a Rodecaster Pro 2, which was money I did not need to spend.
It's a nice toy.
It is a very nice toy. I love it. I don't use it for most of its capabilities at all.
Yeah.
But with it came a free 6-month subscription to Buzzsprout.
Nice.
So I've been using Buzzsprout for the last few months, and I got another 4 months of free subscription with them.
That's a great deal. That's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. They're
really good people there. They really do step up and help if you ever get stuck. They're always there. Great support. I would love to have all 7 of my shows with them, but again, my wife says, no, you need to not spend so much money. So I just have 3 with them, but I love them. I think they're great.
Yeah, I do too. I have another podcast with my daughter we started recently.
Good.
And we are using RSS.com.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about switching over to them because you can have unlimited podcasts with them for $15.99 a month.
Good.
And that includes unlimited episodes. So I may switch over to them after my subscription runs out. I'm not sure though, because I like Buzzsprout's analytics better.
Yeah.
They have their analytics is really good. So I don't know. I'm iffy on switching.
What I always love to do is go to YouTube University and then search Buzzsprout and then type verses and then let it autofill and let it compare Buzzsprout to Podcastle or Buzzsprout to Libsyn and just let somebody explain to you the difference so that you can see it on the screen and go, I really like this. I don't really like that. And then you can let somebody help direct your decision. And that kind of helps me to know what is the best platform for me, because my needs might be different than your needs, or whoever's listening right now, their needs might be different than ours. Yeah. So you need to pick what works for you and your podcast.
Yeah. And that's a good idea. I haven't thought about doing it that way.
Yeah.
So I might do that.
There you go. Good stuff. So we have a whole list of things that we chatted about on our pre-call, and there's so many ways that we can go down these paths. And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on maybe some of the topics that we could talk about today that could benefit you and your podcast, but also the listener. I have my whole list here, but anything stand out to you right now that we can start talking about that you'd like to chat about?
Well, one thing that I've recently been looking at is Buzzsprout has, because, you get into podcasting, and one of the things that you want to do is you want to grow your audience, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so you're always looking at the analytics, you're always looking at your downloads and seeing how many downloads each episode gets.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm bad about that. And I know I probably shouldn't be, but I am. And there's a lot of ways that I've gone about in trying to grow that. Like I've joined Twitter, which I've never been a Twitter user before previously.
Yeah.
I've joined Facebook, which I've never been a Facebook person.
Wow, that's great.
And Facebook groups has been huge for me.
Yep.
In not only promoting my podcast, but that's also where I get the majority of my guests also.
Good stuff.
But Buzzsprout, they have a thing where you can run ads on other podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at doing that. I believe it's $200 for the lowest level. And then they play it up to, I think it's 10,000 times to 10,000 audience, like podcasts where they have listeners of like 10,000 people.
Okay.
So you got like where 10,000 different people will listen to this. And then you get so many suggested clicks back on your podcast, and then so many subscribers. So this is something I'm thinking about doing. I did run a radio ad previously, and it only cost me $100, but I don't think I got any listeners out of that at all. Okay. So I feel like that money could have been used elsewhere for sure.
Yeah. I think one of the best ways that it's worked for me is being a guest on shows or having guests on my show, because I get to connect with other podcasters and we're talking about each other's shows, we're supporting each other. And my audience now, for example, gets to hear about your show. And now hopefully what I'd love to see is people who listen to this show come over and see your podcast, especially if they're dealing with, some mental health issues and some anxiety issues, and they're looking for a great podcast that addresses that. I want them to come find and fall in love with your show.
Yeah.
And I think that's because it costs you your time, but it doesn't cost you money. Right. So in the early days, when a new podcaster is trying to grow, you can try growing on social media. But again, remember that not everyone on social media actually listens to a podcast. They're on social media. So a Facebook user, you can talk to them about your show, but they might not even know what a podcast is. Right. So when you go on a podcast and you're speaking on a podcast, you're speaking to podcast listeners and they know what a podcast is. So there's more likelihood of them coming to your show than someone leaving Facebook and coming and finding you and figuring out what a podcast is for the first time. So I just find you get a better return just by guesting and getting your name out there, talking about your show. And that's kind of the idea of having this format, having you on as a co-host. Again, I want people to fall in love with your podcast and connect with you. That's the idea.
Well, I greatly appreciate that. And that's one thing that has been suggested by multiple people is being a guest on more podcasts and then having guests on your podcast. And I've noticed, like, because I started solo and I decided that I do better when I'm interacting with other people and having conversations with other people.
Yeah.
And so when I started getting other guests on is when my show started to grow.
Good.
And I did start noticing that. And a lot of the people that I have on, like I've had, 2 people that are authors, but they also have their own podcast.
Good.
Or, the lady that is an EFT coach, she also has her own podcast. And so, some of those things have, helped me out. I haven't been being a guest on very many other podcasts, and that's something that I need to work on.
Yeah, so that it just opens the door to have great connections, and you never know what's going to happen down the road too. As you meet other podcasters, as you get on different shows, it just opens the door for you to connect and build that relationship and community, and your audience gets to hear a little different side of you when you're a guest somewhere else, because we don't think to talk about some of the things that we know because we're always interviewing somebody else or we're talking about a topic, but people want to get to know you. They want to know who you are. And by being a guest, the host is going to ask you a question, you're going to answer it, and you're in your community's like, you've never told us about that. That's amazing. So it's great.
Yeah. I did just one other podcast as a guest, and they watch movies from the 1980s, and then they do a podcast over the movie, and they talk about it. but then they have some guest spots where they come on and talk about the movie as well. And I did one episode over that, and I thought that was pretty cool because that was something that I've never even considered doing before. And
Nice.
it was a really unique experience because then I get to go back and watch a movie from my childhood, and then I get to share that with some other people. So that was awesome. I did enjoy that.
Good. And that's that's another side of you. Again, that's not going to come out on your podcast possibly in the future that you would talk about that. So
yeah,
people get to see a different side of you. It's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you have any trouble finding guests early on in your podcast, your first and second guest?
I've been in several Facebook groups where people are saying that they've had issues finding guests. I'm having a problem where I'm getting too many guests. But I'm trying to, schedule people out weeks in advance. Maybe it's because of the topics, I guess. Like my last topic was, I put out there that I was looking for someone that has gone through a difficult divorce, but that they learned something about themselves through the process and what they would have done differently, not only for themselves, but to better the situation for their spouse or their ex-spouse through the process.
Okay.
And I've gotten 6 or 7 people that wanted to be a guest on my show for just that one subject. And I was looking for just one person. So that's something that I'm going to expand out and talk about and see if I can get several different aspects from.
It's good. It's good. Do you do any, like you and I had a pre-chat before we did our episode. Do you do a pre-chat with them, or they just come on and you record right away? How do you do yours?
I had never done a pre-chat until we did ours, and then I thought that was such a great idea. I've started doing that.
Okay, good. Yeah, they don't have to be long. Like you don't have to have an hour pre-chat or anything. Because I find, you know what, I have a lot of first-time guests who have never been on a podcast before. They don't even know what a podcast is. And like right now I have an author podcast, and there's a book coming out, and there's like 20 authors. Each of them wrote a chapter in this book. And most of these people have never listened to a podcast in their entire life. And now to support the launch of the book, they're coming on my podcast to talk about their specific chapter. And they come on the screen and they're so nervous because they're like, I don't even know what we're doing. I don't even know what a podcast is. How does this work? Is there a live audience? Like, what if I make a mistake? And all I do is say, listen, we're just talking today. I just want to meet you, talk about the show, answer any questions. I want to get to know you. And then we'll come back later and record later. And you can see their shoulders just untense in front of you. They seem more relaxed because some of them, they're on camera with me on the screen and they're like, I didn't do my hair. I'm like, we're not recording. It's just you and I. No one else is here. And you can see them just kind of relax, take a big breath. And they're like, okay, I was so nervous. I thought I was recording today and I don't want to make a mistake.
Right.
And I let them know that, listen, we can always do editing. I've had so many weird things happen on podcasts as I interview guests. Don't worry about it. We'll be fine. You'll sound amazing. My job is to make you sound great.
Yeah.
And I just want to have a conversation. That's it. So.
Yeah. And that's what I've done with my last 2 guests. We did a podcast episode, but we did a chat beforehand. And I think that that's made a big difference, not only in how I approach it, but also in the comfort level of the guest.
You mentioned earlier that anxiety is one thing that you really have to focus in on and you're working through. Are you ever anxious as a host?
Every episode.
Really? Okay. So for someone listening and they're exactly the same boat that you're in, how do you deal with it? Do you have any tips for us?
A lot of it for me, and I can't tell you how many times I've sat down to get ready to record and I'm like, I hope the person doesn't show up. I hope the person doesn't show up.
Oh no. Yeah.
Because of my anxiety.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of health issues as well.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of times where I don't feel good.
Okay.
And so that does affect my situation also. But it's also the reason why I do a podcast is to give me something to concentrate on or to uh, give me focus in life and or purpose in life. And I think a lot of times people get stuck in the everyday routine of life of just going through the motions of everything, but they don't have a purpose, something that they consider theirs or that they love doing. Because sometimes you can ask somebody, well, what's your hobbies? And they're like, well, I don't really have any hobbies. And we're like, well, what do you like to do? Well, I don't know. And I think, there's a lot of people, everybody likes to talk about themselves. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Right.
Everybody likes talking about themselves. But I think everybody likes to talk and have conversations with people. And I think if you can get to a point where you're comfortable doing that, and that's where I push myself, even though my anxiety is bad, like I push myself into that because I know once the conversation starts and I get comfortable with talking, that I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes I do have to medicate myself beforehand. Like I take some antidepressant medication or, I do breathing techniques sometimes. So, or like today, I was watching football before our podcast. So I'm not thinking about it and I'm not sitting there all day stressing about it. So that helped.
Okay, so let's flip this around then. For me, I'd like you to teach me, Joey. Like, how can I, as a host, create a safe place for my guest who maybe is struggling with anxiety? Maybe because I've seen where I've had people lined up for pre-interviews or interviews, and they just don't show up, and I'm like, sometimes I'm like, oh, that's rude. Like I'm waiting for them, and they're not here. And then I'm like, well, maybe they're not feeling well or something happened. And I'm not angry, but, I set aside time to be a host and be here and they don't show up. And sometimes I just feel disappointed, but maybe they're just anxious and maybe there's something I can do to alleviate that, or in my emails to them that they understand that we're not recording our pre-interview. Is there any tips that you can give me that could help me to be a better host for somebody struggling with anxiety?
Well, I think the pre-interview was huge.
Okay.
That made a big difference for me.
Okay.
And you sent out links of, here's the interview, a link for when you're going to join. But maybe so you took notes that of things that we talked about in the pre-interview, correct?
Yeah, right. That's right.
Maybe send an outline of those to the person. That way they remember, something that they talked about.
Good idea.
And say, okay, we talked about these things. Is there anything else that if you think about that you want to talk about, or if you decide, is there anything that we talked about that you decide you don't want to talk about or you don't feel comfortable talking about?
Good idea.
So I think maybe that might help a little bit.
Okay. So you mentioned to me that you learned something from me that you're putting into place. You just taught me. So thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Because I don't give that summary. I have it right in front of me. It takes 10 seconds to type it up. So you just changed how I do things. So thank you. Great suggestion.
No problem. Glad I can help.
See, that's why I love doing this, right? And that's the one thing I think people get this misconception that oh, you have a podcast, so you know everything. And you're like, I'm learning. I am learning as I go. I'm getting better every time. I'm getting more confident. I'm maybe a little less anxious than I was in episode 1. And it's like a muscle, right? You're exercising this muscle, it gets stronger. And as we do every episode, we get a little more confident. We find easier tools, cheaper tools, great suggestions like giving a summary back to people before we hit record. See, those are things that make you better. Yeah. And I think that's, again, why I wanted you to come on as a guest co-host, so that we can learn from you. And that's the goal. And home run. Well done. I love it. Great job.
No problem. Now, the thing that worried me the most about doing a podcast, because I originally got the idea of wanting to do a podcast back in 2020.
Okay. Wow.
And it took me 2 years to get to the point of where I was ready to hit record. And the thing that changed everything for me was I was worried about what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. Now, I feel like I'm really good at writing my thoughts down, but there's times where I spend too much time in making those sound good, or where I feel like they sound like it's a situation to where, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. So the one thing that changed for me was AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So when Chat GPT came out, and I can type out my thoughts, put it into there, and say, write this in a friendly, formal manner, and it rewrites my thoughts for me. That changed everything for me, because not only that, but then, like, say I got an author that comes on, or Dr. Fred Moss, where he has multiple articles that he had wrote, and I got him coming on my podcast. I can take his articles and put those into Chat GPT, and then say, okay, give me 10 thought-provoking questions that I can ask him.
Yeah.
And there were several questions where he was like, nobody's ever asked me this before.
Good job.
And I'm like, oh, well, it wasn't me that came up with the question. But, I'm glad that, he was able to get questions that he has never been asked before, and got to express himself in a way that he got to clarify his ideas or expand on his thoughts and his ideas in a way that he never has. And so I think for situations where they're afraid of starting a podcast for the same reasons that I was afraid, go check out Chat GPT. It's free.
Yeah.
Or Google Bard. It's free.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And it'll change your thought process a lot and make you feel a lot more comfortable. It really will.
Such a great suggestion. And I think people are a little afraid of technology. They're afraid of these tools, and they're going to take over the world. And all I say to them is, if you've ever typed a message and you get that little squiggly red line underneath a misspelled word in your typing, welcome to AI. Somebody's there helping you spell better in your emails. If you've ever used Google and typed in, anything, welcome to AI. It's around us all the time, and you've been using it. So don't be afraid of it. There's a learning curve for some people, yes. But there's some amazing tools out there. And there's always YouTube University we talk about that can teach you and guide you. But don't be afraid of those tools. Try them out. See if they work for your podcast. It's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Also, AI, talking about that, ideogram, Yep. That's how I came up with my image for my podcast image. Nice. Because I didn't want to pay anybody.
Yeah.
I did, and then I didn't like it. Like I went to Fiverr.com.
Yeah.
And I it was really generic. I was like, okay, well, it's okay. I can use it, but it's not eye-catching to me.
Mm-hmm.
I found the ideogram off of YouTube, watching YouTube videos, and it's the one AI that you can input text in. Now, it doesn't always get it right, and you may have to do it 10, 15 times for it to get the text right. Yeah. But once it gets the text right, and it'll give you an image. I wanted a guy screaming into a megaphone on my UnMuffled Banter. I want it to be kind of out there. And it gave me back an image that really stood out. And I was like, there we go. And the image is good enough. I put it on T-shirts as well. So
that's great. Good idea. Yeah, I'll definitely put a link for that. It's ideogram. Is that how you said it?
Yeah, ideogram. I'll send you the link for it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes for people listening as well. They can try it out. Is that a paid thing or is it free?
No, it's free.
Oh, well, there you go. Even better.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
So anything else that you're working through on your podcast? I know you said you listened to some of the episodes. I really appreciate listening to my podcast. Is there anything that maybe hasn't been covered yet that you really could use some help with?
The transcripts, we talked about that. Yeah. About how a free way to do the transcripts, because I use Podcastle not only to level up my audio, but for the transcripts. But we were talking about the ability to do that on YouTube.
Yeah. So all I do is I upload my files. Way back when I first started my podcast, everyone was saying, never, ever, ever, ever post to YouTube a picture with the audio attached. You should only have movies, like moving picture, moving video, not just a single image attaching your audio. And despite what everybody told me, I did it anyway. And now Google Podcasts is going away and it's being replaced, and they're kind of blending it into YouTube Music.
Yeah.
And what they want is either video or audio without just an image like I was doing. And now that's what they want going forward. So I'm actually ahead of the curve where everybody told me not to. YouTube is saying, no, go ahead. We like it. So I've been doing that. And every time I uploaded it, I noticed that all my words were showing up when I hit play, and I was getting the subtitles across the bottom of the screen. And I'm like, that's interesting, because sometimes they were good and sometimes there were little tweaks that I would make. And then I looked over to the right-hand side of my screen, and lo and behold, my transcription is sitting right there. It's got timestamps, it's got everything. And I'm like, I'm going to download this and just look at it. And so I listen through my podcast, I look at my transcript from YouTube, I do a couple tweaks. Websites, for example, if I say howtopodcast.ca, it doesn't know how to do the dot in the transcript. So I fix that. Maybe my guest name was misspelled, or maybe I didn't speak something clearly and it gets a little muffled. I go in and just tweak that. But for the most part, 99% of it's pretty well done. So I love it. And I just download that, and that becomes my transcription. And I don't use transcriptions like many gurus talk about, where people think it's a way to get Google to find your show. I use it for people who need it. Maybe the words on screen or the words in their app helps them to understand my podcast more clearly. Then that's why I'm using it. I'm not using it to be found on Google. I have my website, I have my podcast name, and I have my podcast titles for my episodes and the show notes. That's what I put my time and effort into. A transcription for me is not search engine material. I'm doing it for a person who helps them to understand my content. It's all about accessibility, not about being found on Google. So I hear a lot of people saying in podcasts that they don't like transcripts because it doesn't give them return value to be found on Google. And I'm like, that's not the reason why we do it. It's kind of like going to your local big store, and when you walk up to the doors automatically open. That's convenient. It's convenient because you have stuff in your hands or you're pushing a cart. The doors open. And why is that? It's accessibility for people who can't open the doors. And we all benefit from the accessibility of a door opening for us, even though we could open the door ourselves if we needed to. But the fact that it opens for everyone makes it the store available to everyone. Our podcast should be the same way. We might not need a transcription to enjoy a podcast, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be available to everyone.
Right.
So that's the idea behind it. So I just use the free YouTube one and download it. And every time I mention it, people look at me funny like, what? I'm paying this fee every month. It's okay. If you can afford the fee, like I have to spend time to tweak the transcription. If you can afford the fee and that's what works for you, great. I have 7 podcasts. I can't afford 7 times the cost of anything. Yeah. So I'm always looking for another way to do it. And then, like I said, if I make a lot of money with my podcast in the future, great, I'll upgrade and get my time back. But for me right now, just to say that I can't afford it means I'm not going to do it. It's kind of like saying, well, we can't afford to have doors that open automatically on our store, so we're not going to do it. And if you can't get in, too bad. And I'm like, that's not how podcasting should be, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree. See, and I use mod transcriptions. I write a blog for my podcast episodes also. And that's more for me than anyone else, really. Yeah. Just because I like writing. But I do use the transcriptions for that as well.
You could also take your transcriptions in chunks and load them into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to write you an article based on your content. And it'll summarize and go through and give you ideas and maybe write you out a little magazine article, right?
That's true. You could do that.
Which is maybe a better reading experience than reading Dave speaks, Joey speaks, Dave speaks, Joey speaks. But maybe it takes our content and makes something out of it that could be a little bit more readable for your readers as well.
That's true. Now, there is one other thing that I found through going through your website and your stuff was podpage.com.
Yes.
And so I went through podpage.com and I now have a website for my podcast.
Beautiful.
So it's UnMuffledBanter.com.
Great job.
I used Namecheap.com to register my name.
Good job.
So it
awesome.
Was really cheap to get my name registered, and then I got my podcast page up and going. And
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, my howtopodcast.ca website is $12 a year. That's $1 a month. That's not too bad. And then I have my podcast website on Canva. So I don't even pay for that. Canva has free websites. And you just link up your address to a Canva page, and then I can go in and do whatever I want to it. I can change colors, put photos, links. I have my Buy Me a Coffee on there, which is a great way to get some support for your podcast, by the way. People can donate to you through Buy Me a Coffee.
Oh, that's cool.
That's right on my website. I have my Speak Pipe where people can leave me a voice message. All of that built on Canva. And I can go into Canva anytime I want, move stuff around. It's great. So that's a really cool tool.
I might have checked that out.
Yeah.
I'm really liking the pod page, though, because it pulled all my episodes in by itself.
It's so good.
Oh, yeah. Very little work on my end.
They are really good people on Podpage as well. And again, go to YouTube and search up Podpage tips or, some lessons on Podpage. You'll learn so much about how to make it look better, work better. And then the other one I think we talked about on the show was pod.link. And that's a free website. And you just type it into Google, POD, the dot, and then LINK, podlink. And then you search for your name of your podcast. And it gives you back a website address where your podcast is there, all your episodes are showing, and all of the clickable links, just like Podpage, but all of the clickable links for all the players, Apple, Google, YouTube, all those things, they're all there on the screen. And then you can use that to send it out to a guest for your podcast. You can put it in your email signature as a clickable link. So anybody that you get to send an email to, they automatically get it, right? And you can also go to an episode, specific episode, click on that, and the address line across the top expands, and that's a link to that episode specifically. So if I was on your show, Joey, you could send me a link to my episode in an email. I can click it, and instead of going to your pod link and then finding my episode, I go straight to my episode, which is really good for sharing with your guests. When you're telling them, hey, your podcast is live, here's a link. And as soon as I come there, I can see all the links to all the different things, because I might be an Apple person and you might be an Android person. I get every link possible, which is really kind of neat. I also like, it shows me if I'm on on the players. If I look and I only see one or two players, I'm like, why am I not on this one? Why am I not on Audible? And then I go make sure that I sign up for Audible. I go and look and see, where am I? And it kind of gives you the list of everything. So that's pod.link. So make sure you try that as well.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
Good stuff. Was there anything else, Joey, that comes to mind that we could chat about that could help a listener that's starting their show?
I was trying to think of what else there was. I recently joined a website called podcastguest.com.
Okay.
So another way to find podcast guest. And they send out emails with people that are looking to be on podcasts.
Good stuff.
Let me think.
The one that I've been looking at right now is called Podmatch.
Podmatch, yes. I've looked at that one. I haven't signed up for that one yet.
So that one right now in October, we're recording this in October, they're having a online summit meeting with a whole bunch of podcasters. And I think I paid, I'm in Canada, so it was like $25, $26 or something to go to this event. And I get to sit and listen to some of the most amazing podcasters from around the world do presentations to help me be a better podcaster. But they also have, so that's the training side of what they do, but they also have a really good tool to help you be a good host and to find great guests. So you can sign up to be a host looking for guests. You can sign up to be a guest looking for podcasts, or you can sign up to be both. And it's a really good pod matching system to help you find and get great guests. So that's another one. They do have an invite link for that meeting, which I'm going to send to you.
Okay.
And take a look and see if you're interested. But I've signed up. And once you sign up, you get into the community and you can start talking to people ahead of the event. And it's like a one-day event, but you can start talking to everybody and start meeting people right away. I've already made connections and the event hasn't even happened yet. So I'll make sure I send you the link for that so you can take a look.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm signed up with Anchor. That's the Spotify version of podcast hosting. I don't have a podcast on Anchor, but they do podcast, and they had one, I believe it was last month, where it was kind of the same thing, where they had several podcasts that talked about what you can do to improve as a podcaster. And it was a 3-part series. And so I signed up and I watched those as well.
make sure you, while you're still on Buzzsprout, make sure you go through their training program. They have some amazing videos, great teaching for podcasters to encourage you and your show and help you with your, not just using Buzzsprout, but podcasting in general. They've got some really great topics that you can get right from your dashboard where you would see your analytics and all that stuff.
Right.
You can actually get some training. So if you decide to move somewhere else before you move, while you're still there, go through all of their training videos and watch them because they are super. You'll learn so much.
Okay. I didn't know about that. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. It's great. I love when a podcast host like Buzzsprout invests, or even Spotify for podcasters, when they invest in their users and help you get better and train you, because it's kind of selfish because they want you to stay. They don't want you to leave. So they want to give you these training to encourage you to keep your podcast going and not give up. It helps them because they need to pay their bills, but they want to invest in us as podcasters. And that's one of the determining factors that I use to decide which podcast host that I want to have for my podcast. If there's a podcast host out there that doesn't invest in the community of podcasters that pay for their services, I don't feel quite as attached to them. I love when a podcast host says, Joey, we want to help you be successful. And we're going to have these great classes and events and teachings. We want you to do well. And that makes me want to stay. So that's kind of why I love Buzzsprout.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I didn't know about that. I'm going to have to check that out for sure.
Yeah. Good stuff. Joey, we've talked about a lot of stuff. I think my biggest takeaway is your comment to me about how I can do better as far as just that email summary of what we chatted about. Again, I have all my notes in front of me. I'm assuming that you remember everything we talked about back when we had a pre-chat, but that's a big assumption on my part. So I'm going to change the way I do things because of your comment. So you've helped me so much today. I want you to know that. So
I appreciate that.
That's so kind of you to make time to be on here. I would love to keep this door open, Joey, and maybe have you back on in the future, get updates on your podcast, on how you're doing, what you're learning. If you're willing in the future, I would love to have you come back if you're open to that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would love to.
Awesome. Joey, let's shout out your podcast again, where to find you and all of that great information so that everyone listening can come find a brand new podcast they're going to fall in love with, number one, but maybe number two, there's a guest out there that would love to be on your show, or there's a host that would love to have you come on and talk about your journey as a new podcaster and the things that you're working through in your life. I think you could inspire many people. Where do we go and how do we connect with you, Joey?
Well, you can get a hold of me at Twitter at Joey Misbehave.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Or email me at jmisbehaves@gmail.com.
Awesome.
Or unmuffledbanter@gmail.com.
Great.
You can find my podcast at unmuffledbanter.com. Or
Great.
you can just Google Unmuffled Banter. I'm the first thing that pops up.
Of course you are. Good stuff. I love it.
And I'm on all the major platforms. Most of my listens come from Apple, of course.
Good.
And but yeah, I'm getting some listens from all over the world at the moment.
It's exciting. Eh?
And if you're looking for a guest that is going to be raw, honest, and emotional, I'm your guy, because especially the emotional part, we get talking about, anxiety, depression, or, dealing with life. I'm an emotional guy, and I may break down and even cry. I've done that on my own podcast, and I've had to take sometimes a few minutes away just to compose myself a few times.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for someone that's going to be raw and honest, I'm your guy for sure.
Well, for a guy named Joey Misbehaves, you've behaved yourself so well, Joey, on this podcast. You've done so well, and you've brought us so much value and great ideas. And for anybody that's struggling with anxiety, we're here for you. We care about you, and you're not alone. And I just want you to know that there's people out here like Joey who would be a great person to talk to and just chat with, even if it's just like this. And even if it's never an episode that goes into the world, just two people talking about life, I'm sure Joey would love to just listen and to support you. So reach out to Joey. All the information will be in the show notes. And Joey, I really appreciate you listening to my podcast. And I'm so thankful and grateful that you found value in it. And if I can ever serve you in the future for whatever you need, any questions, any comments, anything, please, you have my contact information. I'd love to continue doing life with you and again, have you back in the future.
Sounds good. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, sir.
Awesome. Everyone go check out all the show notes and let Joey know that you heard him on the podcast. And then also go over and check out UnMuffled Banter. Leave a great review, follow, like, subscribe, do all the things. You know what to do. And make sure that Joey knows that you heard him here on the podcast. Joey, thank you so much. Everyone, we'll be back with another great co-host coming up in the future. And lots of great things here happening on the How to Podcast series. Thank you for listening. And Joey, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You've been listening to UnMuffled Banter with Joey Misbehaves. Our passion is to speak to those warriors out there, fighting battles within themselves. And together, we come together as a family and share stories of growth, resilience, and the beauty of finding humor even in the darkest times. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But to contact us, send an email at unmuffledbanter@gmail.com and find Joey on Twitter at Joey Misbehave. Please know that if you're struggling and you just need someone to talk to, you can call the Suicide and Crisis Hotline. The number is simple, 988. The person on the other end will talk to you as long as you need. See you next time on UnMuffled Banter.